Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Our topic today is the Bugzilla bloodbath, the real issue of missed revocations. I've got Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer, and Nick France, CTO of SSL for you here today. As always, we're recording this presentation and we'll share it with you after the webinar. If you've got any questions, we'd love to hear them. Please use the chat function and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And with that, I'll hand you over to Nick and Tim.
Thank you, Leah. How are you doing today, Nick?
I'm good, Tim. Thanks, and thanks, Leah, as well.
Okay, so we have a lot of material to cover today. There's a lot has been going on in the world of Bugzilla and public CAs. And maybe before we get in it, just as a level set, Nick, what's Bugzilla?
So Bugzilla is basically it's a bug tracking system. It's specifically in this case, it's for Mozilla, which is the organization that owns and operates the Firefox web browser. And the reason it's important to us is Mozilla operates a trust program for the Firefox browser. So that's a list of the trusted root certificates like Sectigo and other CAs. Now, Bugzilla is where incidents are reported by the CAs, and this happens in public. It's publicly accessible. Anybody can go there and view the incidents. Anybody can sign up and create comments. So in contrast to, let's say, Microsoft or Apple or Google, where those things happen, but often behind closed doors, the Mozilla one is open. And it is also used by Microsoft, Apple, and Google as well.
Yeah.
But it's basically an open reporting system for incidents that CAs have.
Right.
For
Mozilla, of course, being one of the great early open source projects, one of the things that really showed the world how powerful open source can be. At one point was the most powerful browser in the world and was born on this tradition of openness. And yeah, to your point, Mozilla also, because of that, and because Mozilla had this leadership position going all the way back to the 2000s, in a lot of ways it became the default town center, if you will, for what we call the web PKI, for the public trusted certificate world. And things like Bugzilla and other things that Mozilla operates were the place where everybody came, really, regardless of what browser you were talking about. And it still, in many ways, enjoys that status today. Probably the most obvious example of which is Bugzilla.
Yes.
So this is important. About 2 months ago, I coined a phrase, which is the Bugzilla bloodbath. And what the Bugzilla bloodbath is it's a very sudden surge in Bugzilla incidents for public CAs. And we'll get into what happened and why, but we're probably running, if I had to guess, I'd say at this point at 4 to 5 times the normal volume of open incidents on Bugzilla. It's absolutely enormous. And in my experience, unprecedented. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. We've got more than 80 open bugs on Bugzilla right now, which is just crazy. There should probably be 20. And so it's just off the hook. Multiples of normal expectations. And one of the interesting things going on, again, we'll understand why when we get into it, is this episode right now that's happening in Bugzilla is showing a lot of very common problems. So if you think about it, a bug by its nature is an individual thing, right? There's this one thing that's going on in this one circumstance with this one piece of software, or in this case, certificate authority. But when you look at these things in the aggregate, though there are some outliers, there are huge common themes that we see across all of these bugs, where we're just seeing kind of the same mistake or the same root cause or the same type or style of root cause is occurring across many CAs all at the same time. And then what we'll actually spend the bulk of our time on today is a consequence of these errors and these bugs and these write-ups, which is rampant problems with delay of revocation. And this has turned out actually to be the single biggest theme and the single biggest source of bugs on Bugzilla, because failing to revoke certs the way you're supposed to is itself a bug, is an incident. And we've seen just huge widespread problems with delayed revocation. There have been some problems that have also been revealed out of this. We're not going to spend a lot of time today with the accepted practices for revealing and dealing with incidents, and we're discovering some ways that those practices probably need to be improved. That weren't so obvious when there weren't so many of them, there wasn't so much scrutiny on them, but there are some rules as written practices that I don't think help the community that should probably be updated. And so one of the things that's coming out of this is that it's forcing all of us to talk about the rules and the roles of CAs and what CAs are supposed to be, and things that maybe would have been under the radar or people would have said, is it really that big a deal? Now are coming to the fore and are being treated as that big a deal and probably need to be dealt with. And then the last point about the Bugzilla bloodbath, Nick, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is it is not over.
Yes.
So when we scheduled this about 6 weeks ago, we thought that by now it probably would have run its course and we'd go back and we'd do a nice little recap on this weird thing that happened on Bugzilla, but it is going strong. The number of bucks is going up, not down. The issues that are being revealed is going up and not down. Community participation literally every week is more than it was the week before. So this is a big ongoing thing, and who knows, maybe in 3 months we'll be giving you an update.
I was going to say, Mike, we were just checking a few minutes before we started this webinar about if any major updates had happened, and then you said, there's been a large number of these bugs that have been updated just in the past 24 hours. So this is a very active.
There were 10 new comments in the last 5 hours since the last time I checked. And so this is important. If you're watching this on demand afterwards, put this in the context of the day that it was recorded, because if you're looking at this in a week or a month, more will have happened, right? And we don't know what it is, because if we knew that, we'd have all kinds of powers. So let's talk about these numbers. I alluded to this, and all of these numbers are of 5/21/24. So that is the day that I took a snapshot. We're recording this on 5/22 for what it's worth. 87 open incidents. Like I said, probably less than 20 would be normal. It goes up and down, but an absolutely huge number. 24 of which are for delayed revocation. Right? 40% of those are for delayed revocation. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. And not 40%, a third. And then other mismanagement of incidents was 10. When you add those two together, you're at 34. Now you're at about 40%. So these incidents occur, right? And you've got 39 of those. 49 of those. You have 49 of those incidents, and then you have another 34 I can't manage my incident right incidents, right? So if you think about it that way, more than half of these incidents on average have a mismanagement of the incident, creating another bug in Bugzilla.
Exactly. It's that doubling up that needs to be, understood. So if you have an issuance, a misissuance problem, or you have an event, and then you subsequently fail to take the correct course of action, you then have to open a second incident to explain why you didn't take the right course of action, which is distinct from the actual problem itself. So it just shows how many of these problems are actually spawning the delayed revocation issues from them.
And some initial misissuances have spawned more than one mismanagement bug, because the response has been mismanaged in more than one way. Or the management of the I mismanaged this incident is itself mismanaged. So it's just really crazy. So why are there so many bugs? We started to get at this, but before we do that, this all started with a single surge. A single surge in bugs. This occurred very suddenly at the beginning of March of this year. And the reason for that is that there was a single technically savvy individual who, for personal reasons, wanted to do some research on what was going on in the world of public CAs. And using available tools that look at certificate transparency logs and some scripts, this individual just started, running queries, had things set up where they were running and gathering his own information for his own knowledge. And while he was doing that, he sometimes found certificates that had errors. And when he found certificates that had errors, being a helpful person, he sent them off to the CAs using their officially declared method of reporting an error. So every CA has to have this. If there's an error, here's how you report it. You do this. And some people have an email address you're supposed to send it to. Some people need specific information, but it's it's something like that. Some people have a web form. So he went in and he sent these to using these public reporting methods. So right off the bat, that would have been a spike in the number of incidents that you normally would have. But then I would say most of these CAs did a pretty terrible job of dealing with it, right? And you've gotten written down here, right? Nearly half the misissuance bugs that failed to meet revocation requirements generated delayed revocation bugs, and additional mismanagement occurred also. And I think that number's got worse. I think it's more than half now. But it was so all these other incidents came along because these CAs couldn't handle an incident, which is very revealing and very important. And why did they mismanage issuance so badly? Nick, I've got a thought on this. This is my personal belief, but before I do that, you want to throw out your viewpoint?
I mean, I think I largely agree with what you have here and what you're about to say, Tim. I mean, I think it's important to note from the previous slide, this is someone going out there, getting publicly available data, reviewing it, and reporting all these things. And as you said, they did it in kind of a spike. And I think, the CAs, especially the smaller ones, were perhaps not used to this. I mean, they may have gone months, years without seeing an incident. And that's not that they didn't have them, but these incidents have to be reported and they have to be discovered and then reported. So I think that spike in them has caused a lot of the smaller CAs, but as you've said here, they perhaps aren't used to dealing with these things.
You have a lot of CAs.
The reasons.
You have a lot of CAs who are sitting in the public root store who are very niche. Almost all of them are focused on a single geography, and a whole lot of them are focused just on that local government or that government and quasi-governmental organizations, like the phone company.
But they are still trusted the same as the larger CAs. That's a critical thing to understand here. So they should be held to the same standards as any size of CA, because a certificate issued from one of those small quasi-governmental CAs you mentioned works exactly the same as a certificate from us or from Let's Encrypt or someone like that. So we should all be held to the same standard.
Yeah, the analogy that I used on the Root Causes podcast, the one that just went up earlier today, is that if you think of the web PKI as a fortress, as a castle with walls, every CA is a door into that fortress, and it doesn't matter how popular you are or where you are in the world or how much you're used or who your target user is, your target subscriber is. It's just another door into the fortress, and all the doors are equally large, and all the doors are equally defended or not, right? And so if you have a door and that door is weak, it doesn't matter if that door is sitting in some small population country somewhere in Southeast Asia. It doesn't matter. Anybody can still walk through that door the exact same way as if it were Let's Encrypt or Sectigo.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And because these things are these small niche, mostly just focusing on the local government, they don't get looked at. And so suddenly they're getting looked at by the nature of how this savvy individual was doing his research. And because of that, they're getting bug reports. And these are people who don't know what to do with a bug report. Some of them clearly weren't monitoring, just weren't looking for bug reports at all. They had this going to mailboxes that were never checked.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, they didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle an incident. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to stand by the second statement. I wrote this at the time. We've seen a reduction in mismanagement bugs. Maybe. I'm not so sure, right?
Maybe. I
and
think
they
we will
don't
over
know
time,
what
Tim.
to
I
do.
think we will over time. I think it will be and is currently a learning event. It is
Yes.
happening, as we said, in real time. These smaller CAs that are perhaps, as you quite rightly say, not used to dealing with these reports correctly, they are now having to wake up and deal with them correctly. And whether that's, activating plans that they maybe wrote decades ago and forgot about, maybe they're having to change the plans and procedures, staff up. I don't know. But I do agree with this statement that we will see, maybe not now, but we will see a reduction in mismanagement bugs as the CAs become more and more aware they have to deal with these things in a much better and a much more timely fashion.
And then lastly, we have seen a rampant willful delay of revocation. And this is probably what Nick and I are going to spend the majority of our time on today. The willful delay of revocation. In fact, let's go into that. So,
Yeah.
failure to revoke on time by the numbers. What do I mean by rampant willful delay of revocation? So, first of all, the analysis I'm quoting here is from a community commentator who just goes by the name of Wayne. I do not know who Wayne is. Wayne has not shared personal information, and there's no reason why anybody has to. But Wayne is somebody who I've seen from his commentary, I'm guessing it's a he, is extremely savvy, understands certificates, and knows how to read the rules, and has done a very good job of being a contributor to the community in the last few months. Way to go, Wayne. Tip of the hat to you. And one of the things that we've seen here is that Wayne, at this long address, has done some research. And what Wayne did is, at a certain point in time, he took every MOPE and misissuance bug that required revocation of more than 100 certificates. He looked at what had happened at various marks at the 5-day, 15-day, and 30-day mark by looking at CRLs to determine how many of them had been revoked and how many had not. So he ran a script, took the set of certificates that were reported by the CA, ran them through the script, and gave us results. Now, there were some slight things Wayne had to fudge because some of the CAs actually didn't report their misissued certs correctly or had ambiguities. And also, some of the CAs weren't very good at saying exactly when the revocation event should have started. So Wayne had to make some judgment calls. It was clear on that. And he wrote in his write-up, consider this a rough summation given the various fuzzy factors involved. So the point behind from Wayne is think about this directionally, as opposed to being down to the percentage point on everything. And I think that's valid. But directionally, you'll see there's something huge going on here. And lastly, this research was done on 4/27/24. So at this point, this research is 3 weeks old, and everything is evolving dynamically. But I think if you look at the trend, it's not really different. The trend's not different in a meaningful way from what Rain reported.
Yeah. And just to say, Tim, on that the point about willful, neglect or willfully not revoking these certificates, the industry guidelines say that when certain events occur and certificate misissuance occur, there's a very short time window in which those certificates have to be revoked. And that's because, a publicly trusted certificate out there that is bad, that is misissued, that is potentially very dangerous, is potential to impact any person on the planet with an internet connection and with a browser, right? The relying parties, as we call them, average internet users, which includes you and me and everybody listening to this webinar. So it's important that those happen in a short space of time. And a CA choosing not to follow those guidelines for the reasons we're going to talk about is what we mean when we say willful ignorance of these, these revocation guidelines.
As opposed to accidental failure. So for instance, if you had a bug, let's say you had a revocation tool that was supposed to run through and you fed your 100 certs into it and you hit the button and for some reason it bugged and it stopped on cert 53 and it didn't finish and you didn't know why, and by the time you got it fixed, instead of being 24 hours, it was 25 hours, that would be accidental. Now that would still be an error. That would still be a Bugzilla bug, but it wouldn't be willful. But what we've seen is willful, which is CAs just deciding, you know what, I could, but I'm just not gonna.
Yeah.
Right? Which I know we can have a debate about which one is worse, but it's obvious. It's hard to make the case that willful is better. And Wayne reported everything to 2 decimal points. I reported them just to 1 for the most part, unless there was a reason not to, just to make it more readable. So 20 total in Wayne's results. So I'm going to show you 2 slides of 10. So this is the first slide of 10. So on the first column, we have the name of the CA. Second column is the total number of certs that are affected in the event. And as you can see, this varies quite a bit. And then Wayne puts number of missed at 5 days, 15 days, and 30 days. So number missed, so a lower number is better, right? It's number that were missed. So 100% is the worst possible result, and 0% is the best possible result. And then lastly, Wayne says, as of 4/27, when this was done, is this event over or not? And that's what's ongoing. If I say yes, that means the event is still going on, which means that missed at 30 days may not be, the real story, or we don't know how long it's going to go. And so if we look here, I'm not going to, let's not like read every CA off because that'll take too long. But you see there's a lot of range here. Some of these are all done in 5 days, which is correct behavior, and that doesn't get a failure to revoke bug. But anything that's not done in 5 days does need a failure to revoke bug. And some of these things are hugely high, 100%, 99.95%, right? Very, very high numbers. And then as they roll out to the higher ones, you see they drop down, but they're still high. Now, this is the next page. So again, we've got the CAs and we've got the numbers. And by the way, you see Sectigo had one in there. And we've got the numbers rolling across. Again, some are ongoing, some are not. But let's look at the roll up of this. So what I did here was I took those 20 and I don't know why I have the number 3 there. I think that was a typo on my part. It's the percent missed. And so we looked at the different numbers, 0%, 50%, 75%, 90%, and 95%. So what percentage are missed? And then 3 different time periods. So first of all, 5 days out, okay? Out of 20, 15 of them were not done on time. Out of 20, 15% of them were not done on time. Out of 20, half of them were not done. Actually, 3/4 of them were not done on
Yep.
right. 3/4 of them had at least 75%. So again, how to understand this? If there's more than 0%, then some of the certs weren't revoked on time. That's that first column. Second column there would means that more than 50% of the certs were not revoked on time. So if you can look at that, half of them had at least 3/4 of the certs not revoked on time. So we're not talking about a situation where a CA has, X number of certs and 4 of them are stragglers and the other 500 are done, right? No, well, we had 504, 500 of them got done, but 4 didn't. We're talking about more than 3/4 of them not done. That's half of them.
Yep.
Only one less. 9 of the 20 had more than 90% of their certs remaining after 5 days. More than 90%. And 7 of them, more than a third of the CAs, had more than 95% of the certs remaining after 3 days. They didn't even try to revoke them.
And again, 5 days is the kind of the maximum window in
Yes.
the guidelines and the root program requirements. That's why we're doing it as 5 days here, so everyone's aware.
That number should be 0.
It should, and there are some incidents where you have to do in 24 hours as well. But we could say that
which was none of these 20 for what it's worth.
None of these,
Yeah.
but what we can say is, in the best case scenario, a correctly operating CA should have 100% of their certificates revoked and presumably replaced inside this 5-day window. And as we can see, as you said, Tim, a third haven't done more than 95%. You said this is not 1 or 2 difficult to replace certificates out of hundreds or thousands. These are vast percentages of the affected certificates simply not being handled in the required time period.
Yes, Nick. Well said. Better said than I said it, but that's the point. Now let's look at
As we've said, there's a lot of numbers to deal with here, and it can definitely be quite confusing, but I think you can see what we're trying to explain.
So at 15 days, it doesn't get much better.
Nope.
Only 3 more CAs get their revocation done. Now 12, still more than half, aren't done after 15 days on a 5-day event. And everything else doesn't get a lot better either. The people with more than half the certs remaining goes from 10 to 8.
And so again, this isn't some CAs going, oh well, we're going to replace everything, but it's going to take us 6 days, not 5 days. It's going to take us 7 days, a full week to do it.
Yeah,
This is illustrating that
without
this is not that.
three times the allocated time. 3 of them still have revoked less than 5% of the outstanding certs. Less than 5%. And 30 days out on a 5-day revocation event. Now, this is out of 19, not 20. So these numbers are even worse than they look, because one of these people that Wayne had measured hadn't been around for 20 days yet. So out of 19, out of 20, out of 19, 9 of them still were not done after 30 days. And those 3, the same 3 that had revoked less than 5% of their certs after 15 days, still had revoked less than 5% of their certs after 30 days.
Yep.
So this is shameful. This is
It
terrible. And there's no way you can interpret this as anything except willful neglect of the rules.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't even attribute this to incompetence, because the level of incompetence would have to be vast. This is willful
as we
neglect.
said, this is not exceptions. You could understand if there are tens of thousands of certificates to be revoked, you get to 6 or 7 days, okay, there's a dozen that we were struggling to get in touch with, or some reason, which again I'm still personally not convinced is valid, but it illustrates that it isn't that. This isn't the bulk being done in the right time with some stragglers. This is, as you said, Tim, willful neglect of the regulations that require these actions to be taken.
Caring. So why are there so many failures to revoke correctly? So here's what the CAs say, and this is consistent. Like, I think this is 100% of them. I can't think of a CA who didn't get their revocation done on time who did not make this excuse. I think they all did. They say, these certificates govern critical certain services that people very badly need. When an outage in those services would be disastrous, the subscribers cannot get these certificates swapped out in time. And because this misissuance doesn't affect security, because it's something we would consider to be trivial and unimportant, we think it's in the best interest of everyone if we give the subscribers extra time to swap out the certs. Now note, they say this even if it's taking them 50 days to get the certificate swapped out. Like, really? 50 days? Right? 1/7 of the year? And you can't get this done?
Yeah, and a couple of points to note on this, though, Tim. That third bullet that you've got there, the misissuance doesn't affect security. That's still something that's being repeated, despite Mozilla's guidelines for posting these incidents explicitly says that saying it doesn't affect security is not one of the things you can write down. It's not one of the options. You can't say, we didn't do this because we didn't think it was a security issue. You know, that's completely not even, that should not be on there, because that is not a valid, and I'm not suggesting that any of the other reasons listed here are valid, because I also don't believe they are, but that one particularly is explicitly excluded from being used as rationale as to why you don't revoke certificates, and yet it is still something that is being put out there by some CAs.
And if you think maybe I'm overstating it, then what I've started to do is I went and I captured the same excuse being offered over and over and over and over and over and over and over again by the different CAs.
Yep. And now you and I, Tim, know as well that point about we can't replace them quickly and it was a critical service and outages. You and I have both been around in this industry far too long, right? So we've both heard those repeatedly. But what I will categorically say in today, 2024, this point in 2024, certificates, and these certificates we're talking about, the web PKI, as you've repeatedly said, these certificates are absolutely unequivocally automatable. They can be, we can see them time and time again, replace, reissued, installed, provision to the tune of millions and millions of certificates in any given day of the week. So I want to be clear because, again, it's my belief as well is that you're saying these can't be replaced quickly. I understand. I've been involved in incidents where these things are difficult to replace. But in 2024, for a security critical product like a certificate for your website, your applications, and whatever it's for, the fact that that can't be replaced that quickly is almost inexcusable because every
Absolutely.
technology exists to allow it to happen.
Yeah, and in the event that you actually can't do this at your organization, that's a terrible indictment of your organization. Like any IT organization that really cannot swap out 7 certificates in 5 days, let alone 15, is just incompetent. Pure and simple. So here's what I think is actually going on. And again, I've got my opinion here. Do you want to offer something, Nick, before I opine?
No, I think the points you and I were often, we do a lot of these webinars and things, Tim, and you and I are often very, very aligned, and that's partly due to, the way we work together, but our experience as well. And I think what you're about to say is absolutely right. So please go ahead.
So, forcing revocation on a subscriber is uncomfortable. It's especially
Absolutely.
uncomfortable when it's the CA's fault. And in every one of these cases, it's the CA's fault. The CA had an error. It was an unambiguous error. The CA could have done it differently. The CA didn't. They had an error. They go back. They say, you've got to swap these certs out in 5 days. And the customers don't want to. The CAs don't want to force this revocation on the subscriber, so they don't. They just don't do it.
And you and I, Tim, have lived through this personally, repeatedly. We
Yep.
know forcing any subscriber, and I'm sure that there may be people listening to this that have heard you or I ask them to take this action
Yeah.
and been involved in calls. It is a difficult and painful process, and we're strong advocates of automation to help alleviate that pain. We know it's difficult, and especially we've lived through Heartbleed, where it wasn't anybody's fault, and it was, sorry, you've got to replace these certificates by the millions, and it's to do with some piece of code that was inserted decades ago that's nothing to do with anybody. When it's your own fault, yes, it is harder to do, absolutely. But again, I don't feel that's an excuse.
And it isn't an excuse. And the analogy I've used in the past is this is like a firefighter who, when the time comes and you're supposed to run into the burning building, decides they don't want to run into the burning building, right? So being a firefighter is lots of fun when you're sitting around the firehouse, doing push-ups and making big spaghetti dinners. It's not as much fun when you're taking your life in your hands running into a burning building. But the reason you get to do that first stuff is because sometimes you have to do that second stuff. And now the time has come to run in the burning buildings, and these CAs just say, nope, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to. Now, this is exacerbated by a single large CA that is very visibly not pursuing these revocations. And I think part of what happens is that a lot of these smaller niche CAs who don't know how to deal with incidents that we talked about earlier on see this, and they see a whole bunch of their peers, and they see lots and lots of CAs all delaying their revocation, and they don't see anything happening as a result. So they go, well, okay, so there's 2 ways I can do this. I can do the thing I don't really want to do, or I can not do the thing I don't really want to do. And it appears that nothing will be different to me regardless of which one I choose. So why don't I do the thing why don't I ignore that thing that I don't really want to do? And I think this is a lot of what we're saying. And, part of the problem here is there has been no immediate visible accountability. Now, let's be clear, that doesn't mean there won't ever be any accountability. And that doesn't mean that perhaps there are consequences that are not visible. But when you're talking about a bunch of niche CAs, for the most part, not all of them, who don't deal with incidents anyway and don't really have a philosophy on this stuff, and they go, oh, well, I don't have to do this and nothing bad's going to happen. They're just deciding not to do it. And I think that that's what's going on. Now, and another important thing that's come up in the debate is this a thing that the CAs are allowed to do? And Nick was alluding to this when he talked about the Mozilla rules earlier. So let's talk about this. I'm going to say, okay, by the rules as written, Are CAs allowed to make this judgment? That absolutely unambiguously is a no. For sure, they are not allowed by the rules as written to make this judgment. And there's unambiguous language from the CA browser forum on this. In the baseline requirements, they have defined revocation periods. They do not allow for an exception. There is nothing in there that says exceptions can be made under the following circumstances or in the following ways, or in the event that there's an exception, here's what you do about it. They do not, the rules as written do not have that. Now, the Mozilla root program, and this is what you were referring to, Nick, does have something written into its root program that says that a CA can exercise this judgment when disruption to relying parties would outweigh the harm of misissuance. And this is the thing that all of these CAs are clinging to. Well, the root program says blah, 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 blah. But number one, by this policy, the CAs must report the reason for late revocation on a subscriber by subscriber basis. Almost none of them has. Of these more than 20 failure to revoke on time incidents, I'd say maybe 3 of them have any attempt at this at all. And a week ago, that was 1.
Yeah, and I think if it's going to be something like that, it should be very clear and very explicit. Again, it's not ideal that an individual customer is named and reason why, but that would help to the understanding as to why this has not been revoked if there was a very clear and very defined reason as to why it couldn't happen. I think what we've seen in some cases, especially in the past few days maybe, are, lists of subscribers where the subscriber, this is the end customer of the certificate, isn't actually named properly. They're given a subscriber to, and then one of perhaps 4 generic reasons as to why they couldn't revoke the certificate.
It
And
still isn't
that
what the rules
really isn't.
require.
No, it isn't really in the spirit of what is intended here.
Yeah, and let's also point out that that's only for Mozilla. So that's what Mozilla allows you to do, but there are other major root programs. There's Chrome, there's Apple, there's Microsoft, and there's, 3 or 4 smaller programs than that, all of which don't have this provision. So even if you did report this absolutely correctly and follow the Mozilla root program rules, you still would be in violation of the program rules from Apple and Chrome and Microsoft and the others.
Yes.
And so it could be at the end of this that a CA would decide to delay revocation anyway, according to the rules, knowingly. And in that case, the CA would write up a second Bugzilla bug, and they would be and it would be a negative on the CA's overall reliability record. And that's how it should be. That's how it should be designed. That the CA, people should look at this and say, oh, well, they didn't get this revocation done on time. That's bad. That's bad on thinking of them as a good CA. And that would be the nature of it, and that would be the point. But with everybody just ignoring these rules right and left, there is a lost in the noise problem potentially, right? Where CAs don't see this. Now, another big thing that comes up that we also need to cover is, we didn't really mention this, but 2 of the open failure to revoke bugs right now, they're both from the same CA, is due to a CPS mismatch. And so an important thing for us to discuss is, does a CPS mismatch constitute a revocation event? So this CA in particular is saying, look, the problem is that our CPS, or certificate practices statement, did not match the actual practices that we were using. Now, the practices we were using were within the rules. They were in and of themselves compliant, except that they didn't match our CPS. And therefore, writing up a bug, but we're not going to revoke any of these certs at all. And the reason we're not going to revoke these certs is that they were issued according to the rules. They just didn't match our CPS. And therefore, the certs that we would replace them with would be identical, and it's not useful to the ecosystem to replace a cert with an identical cert. That is the argument that is made. Now, that argument is a fallacy, and we're going to walk through why. So if you say, does CPS mismatch constitute a revocation event? The answer is an unequivocal yes, and we will explain why. So this is what I said. The apologists say no because the new certificate is quote unquote identical to the revoked certificate. And that's actually a word we've seen used, right? Identical. But they're not identical. So that's just on the face of it not true. They are not identical. And they are not identical because they have a different issuance date. So this is very important. So certificate A, original certificate, is issued on a certain day, t equals 0. And then there's a problem when you discover a CPS mismatch. And if you went and you sent out a new cert, the new cert would be issued on t plus 180 days. And that's important because the CPS is a document that is yoked to a certain period in time. So it's a timestamp document that explains the practices behind any individual cert. And as such, it is really part of the certificate because you can take the certificate, you can look at the not before date, you can marry that to the CPS, you look at the two of them side by side, and then you come back and you say, okay, this is when that occurred, right? And so that is a that is a way that you can tell the practices that occurred during that CA. Now, if the CPS was wrong, then you look at the not before date, you compare it to a CPS that's incorrect, and you come back with an incorrect result about what you think happened.
Exactly.
And the solution for that, the way that's resolved, is to revoke the certificate. So if the CPS doesn't represent what really happened, this is a transparency problem, and revocation and replacement eliminates that transparency problem. And that's why this is a revocation event. That's why we have CPSs, timestamp CPSs at all. It's for this need. That's the only reason that practice exists. And let's note that there could be a debate made about severity. If we said, look, the change to the CPS was sufficiently minor that we do not believe that this revocation is warranted, and you go back to the debate from earlier slides, then maybe you have that debate. But that's not the debate that's going on. The contention has been that they are identical, the new certificates are identical to the old certificates, and therefore there is utterly no utility by definition of revoking and replacing these certs. And that's just demonstrably factually incorrect. It's just not a correct argument. It is factually wrong. Now, the other thing that was attempted was to take a CPS statement, and I blocked out the CA's name, but the CA literally, this is what they put. They took the PDF of their CPS and they just put this red note on it. This CPS contains an errata, please see version 3.2.0. And so this is what's being offered as a surrogate for revoking and replacing the certificates. So then the question is, can a CA simply mark and publish CPS with errata to solve this problem? Nick, can they?
No, quite simply.
No, right?
No.
Why not?
Why?
Well, first of all, there's no reliable change log. How do I know when that errata went up? How do I know if this red note here, how do I know when that red note went up? How do I know what if that red note gets changed over time? So I'll point out that there's an erratum in the red note. The CPS contains an errata. That's actually a singular plural problem. It should be an erratum or errata. And that actually matters because it matters for how many errors are we talking about. Are we talking about a single error or multiple errors? So this is actually a communicative problem in that error makes it unclear to me how many errors I need to look at. So there's an erratum in the erratum notice. So what if they were to fix the erratum in the erratum notice? Would there be a change log of when that had been changed? No. And I wouldn't know what the old one said, and I wouldn't know what the new one said, because this isn't a system that has that kind of thing. There's no visibility on when the watermark appeared. There's no visibility on how the watermark changes over time. The reason we have the timestamp CPS system we have is because there's full visibility on all these things.
Exactly. There's an existing system with the CPS, and CPSs, to be clear for everybody, they do change. We update
Yeah,
ours very frequently. They may
sure.
update due to
That's
industry
fine.
guideline changes. They may just, change due to
Change
procedural or
practices.
technical
You figure
changes.
out there's a better way to do it, and you decide to do it that way. Yeah.
Exactly. But there are guidelines as to how you update and how you release those, and they are timestamped and they are versioned and they are documented.
Right.
So anybody relying on a certificate can look at the date that certificate was issued
Right.
and very easily tie it to a corresponding CPS under which that
All
certificate
right.
was issued.
Furthermore, what if I was working on that CPS prior to that erratum notice being put up? How do you know who did? How do you know who read that CPS and drew conclusions from it? What way do you go back to those people and let them know that you've added an errata watermark? There is no way. But once again, revocation solves this problem because the cert that's active, you have a CPS and you know what it is and you know it's all current. So, and then lastly, the interested party is forced to sleuth out the differences. You have to go and somehow say, oh, something's wrong. I've been informed that something's wrong in this, but nobody's told me what it is or where it is. And now I have to go figure it out on my own, which again is the opposite of transparency. And then lastly, there's nothing in here in this system that guarantees that the only changes are corrections to the quote unquote errata. What if I also made a procedural change and I put that in with the same updated CPS? So I've been told to go and look at version 3.2.0. So if I went and analyzed the diffs between the two and found a number of places where one of them said one thing and the other one said the other thing, how many of those were quote unquote errata and how many of those were updates in procedures that are actually material? I don't know. There's nothing in this system to tell me that.
Nope.
So it's fundamentally opaque and uncommunicative, and it's not an acceptable surrogate, and it's really a very poor attempt at one, in all honesty.
Yep.
So another thing we've mentioned, there have not been immediate visible consequences for late revocation. So why has that been? Browsers today only really have one response to CA mismanagement, which is root distrust, and root distrust is a big deal. It's the death penalty.
Yeah, I mean, it should be made clear that is really the only current tool that
Yeah.
browsers generally have. We've seen it happen before with smaller and larger CAs.
Yep.
But again, we know from people on both sides when those incidents happened it's not something that the browsers can do particularly easy or particularly lightly. It's not a light touch. It's not something that can be released overnight. It does have an impact on the perhaps unfortunate subscribers of any distrusted CA. It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
And nobody wants to live in a society where the death penalty is used willy-nilly, right?
No.
You want to live in a society where the death penalty is only used when there's no other choice. And so the problem is they don't have their equivalent of a $50 fine. So you can't go around and give people $50 fines. All you can do is kill them. And as a consequence, we almost never do, which is good. And as a consequence of that, there's not really any accountability. So one of the things that's been brought up in the public debate around this is that the browsers might benefit from the addition of a less severe response, something they could do that could mitigate the problem and also discourage this malfeasance without having to go all the way to distrust. And some ideas have been proposed. You take individual misbehaving CAs and you shorten their maximum certificate term, which what that does is that slows down, right? So if they were on 90-day certs, now if they do have misissued certificates, they only last 90 days. We've got,
well, in some cases they're not being revoked inside of 90 days anyway. So yeah,
right, exactly. We've got
a solid response.
events that are at or well on their way to sail past 90 days.
Yep.
If that CA were limited to 90 days, then at least the problem would be mitigated in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Distrust EV is another option to say these are the most, these are supposed to be the most trustworthy certs, so let's take those away. You could put something, there are a number of mechanisms you could use to say, okay, as soon as this set of misissued certs hits 5 days, my browser's just going to not trust them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could divide that last one almost into two, Tim, because there's one, as you said, there's mechanisms, things like one CRL, it's called, that I think Mozilla have, and CRL sets that Google have or used to have,
Right.
where they can actually explicitly tell their browsers that certificate is revoked, even if the CA doesn't revoke it. So there is that mechanism on a per certificate basis. But also, one thing I would just point out to that last one is, while the death penalty, the CA distrust is a big deal. Doing a CA distrust, doing a phased distrust, or doing a specific distrust, a bit like that last point, is eminently more possible today because of much more faster software updates, right? So if you go back even 10 or just 10 years or so, maybe 15 years, doing a distrust required a big amount of coordination because you have to plan big software updates, Windows service packs, version releases. We're in a state now where most operating systems, whether it's for your phone or your laptop, probably update very, very frequently. And even browsers, I mean, I think Chrome are on like a 3-week release cadence right now, perhaps, maybe even less. And some, like Windows, have built-in update mechanisms for the trust store. So these things can potentially be done easily. It doesn't take away from the impact, but doing a selective or a phased distrust is something that can be coordinated a lot more easily. But as you just put in the bottom corner, it's still not immediate. It's something that is quicker than it used to be, but still takes time. And we don't know.
So,
you and I don't know if there's going to be any consequences.
There may be stuff that is behind the scenes or that is upcoming that Nick and I are not aware of. So do not misconstrue this slide as saying that there will never be any consequences for this on any CA. What we're saying is nobody has seen those consequences yet. But on the other, in all fairness, Nick and I will see them the same time everybody else sees them. But there's been this visibility, I think, for people who don't think about this as closely as you and I do, to say, well, nothing happens, right? Among people who aren't really thinking through, well, what is this going to look like in the long term and things along those lines. Now, all this argument, well, there's no security impact, so we're not going to revoke them. So let's say these errors truly have no security impact. Let's not even debate that. So is this a problem, Nick? Is this a problem?
It is still a problem. Yeah, I mean, because even if they don't have a real security impact, and as we've said, that's not something you're really allowed to say. It's still about following the rules and the regulations that are written. And bear in mind, these regulations we're talking about, some are from the root programs, be it Mozilla, Microsoft, Apple, or Google. Some are from the baseline requirements, the industry guidelines. They haven't existed for a long time. You and I both remember a time when we were working for CAs when it was effectively a Wild West, right? There were no guidelines to follow. And, that it didn't work very well, quite frankly. We both know it didn't work very well. And so having rules is a good thing. I think we can all agree on that just as a general societal thing. And while there are various severities of rules,
and only if those rules can't be eclipsed by loose opinion-based judgments whenever it's convenient for somebody to trot out a loose opinion-based judgment, which is what's going on. So if CAs are allowed to choose based on opinion, it is predictable that many of them, I won't even say some, many of them will choose the easiest path and not the most rigorous. And we have seen this. We saw this in the earlier numbers. We saw this in the more than 20 delayed revocations. And all of those.
And when we say easiest path, we mean easiest path for the CA, or perhaps easiest path for the subscriber, not the easiest path for the billions of users on the web, not the easiest path for the security of the internet, or the best path, if you want to call it that way. So, everybody would choose the path of least resistance, is what we all do. And so if you have these kind of loosey-goosey things where people can make their own decisions, inevitably, I mean, you said most, Tim, I think you could almost say all. I think there'll be some CAs that wouldn't do that, but you're not far off all.
The failure to events today, I haven't done this, but it's probably all.
Yeah,
it's probably all. Don't send me an angry email if you discover one of them that you don't think that's the case, but it's probably all. If it's not all, it's damn near all.
Yep.
And this is something that I've insisted on. I've said this a lot of places to a lot of people, and I think I'm going to have to keep saying this a lot of places to a lot of people. The CA and browser industry mix these rules. This is made by the CA Browser Forum, which is named what it is for a reason. If the rules are bad, we have the power to change them. And we need to change bad rules, not ignore them. And once we start ignoring our rules whenever it's convenient, why do we have the rules at all?
Exactly.
Now, the last point I want to make here real quick. Willful ignorance of the rules may indicate other problems with a CA's competence or integrity. So
Yeah,
as
I
soon as
think you could
somebody
argue
starts declaring, oh, I don't feel like following that rule today, I'm going to turn around and say, and what other rules do you not feel like following?
that's it. If you can be demonstrated to, ignore what is a relatively simple rule, you
Yeah,
have to take an albeit admittedly difficult action, but it's a simple rule that
it's
says you have to
unambiguous.
do X.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, what are the things you're not doing? And what are the things you're not doing that cannot be publicly scrutinized? Remember, all of this came out from, one or a small number of independent researchers
Yeah.
looking at publicly available data. So it is a good indicator. If you do something wrong that is very, very public, what do you potentially also do wrong that is very, very private? And I think that is an absolutely valid point to look at.
I think that's a valid point. I think in the interest of time, we can skip this slide. This is just things that affect the severity of this decision to willfully ignore the rules. Some of these decisions are more severe than others. It's about the number of and the nature of the misissuance and things like the lifespan of the certificate. Again, if you had
Yeah.
90-day certs or you had 10-day certs, it would be considerably less offensive not to revoke your certs on time. But again, creating loopholes is dangerous, especially when they are vague and opinion based.
Yeah. So even if you had a guideline that says, okay, well, in cases of critical infrastructure, then you don't have to revoke for X number of days, which I think you and I both disagree with anyway. But even if you had that, there's still going to be some interpretation about what counts as
Yep.
critical and how do you demonstrate it? How do you prove that to the general public, the internet users? How do you prove that to a trust program or a browser operator? So it's very, very difficult to do that. And as you said, creating these loopholes just inevitably leads to people abusing them anyway.
Yep. And then revocations and expiration. The other thing is, one of the things, this is something I posted on Bugzilla a week or two ago. But if we go down to the second paragraph, in this incident, for example, 322 of 1176 impacted certificates, or 27.4%, are revoked or expired after 49 days. To put things in perspective, if these certificates expirations were perfectly evenly spread, that would be 13.4%. That is nearly half of the revoked or expired certificates. So this is another important point. We see these certificates that have these long delayed revocations are possibly using that to not revoke so many of them, because some of them are just going to expire out on their own. And to take this to its most extreme, why don't I just set my revocation event for 399 days? And then at that point,
Yeah.
I just never have to revoke anything, right? And so that is something that should be avoided. So last point on this, and then we got to go. One of the other things that's come up here that I think is worth pointing out is that there's been this tendency that we haven't really seen before that suddenly has emerged in the Bugzilla bloodbath to name individual reporters. So when someone reports a bug, we've seen on these bugs where people have said who that is, if they've known who that is, and that goes against the best practices. People need to be able to report bugs anonymously. There are a number of reasons why people may not want their name associated with a report. And what should matter is the accuracy of the report, not the person who reported it. And if people are going to be outed for reporting bugs, this can have a chilling effect on bug reporting. I know two individuals who individually have told me that they're extremely displeased with this tendency that we're seeing. And so I want to use this opportunity to remind all of the CAs that you should not reveal the name of people reporting bugs unless they want you to. That's not the point. The point is the bug. It's not about who reported it. And furthermore, I want to encourage Mozilla to establish an explicit policy for anonymity of reporters when you're reporting things on Bugzilla. So we ran long. We were afraid we were going to run long. Real quick, if you liked this, I co-host a podcast that's focused on PKI and security called Root Causes. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please come listen to us. We're talking a lot about the Bugzilla bloodbath. We talk about the world of public CAs and all matters PKI, encryption, post-quantum cryptography, etc. We would love to have you come join us. And with that, Leah, we're ready for questions.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Nick and Tim. There was a lot of content to be covered today. We are kind of up to the hour, but I think we answered everything during the presentation. If you haven't felt that your question was answered, then do get in touch with the Sectigo team directly. And if you like this webinar, keep an eye on our website where we announce upcoming webinars. And for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.